Morning arrived quietly, the way it always did in her life. Not suddenly, not with urgency, just slowly, gently, as if it did not want to disturb anything that was still sleeping. Soft light entered the room through the window. It touched the wall first, then the floor, then the small table near the window. Outside, the city was awake but unhurried. A distant sound of traffic moved like a low breath. Somewhere nearby, a door opened and closed again. Life continued, calmly, without asking her to join right away. She stood by the window, holding a warm cup in both hands. The heat traveled into her fingers, steady and quiet. She did not drink yet. She liked holding the cup more than drinking from it. It gave her something solid to feel in the morning, something real. I remember mornings like that, mornings that feel soft but heavy at the same time. She looked out through the glass, but her eyes were not focused on anything in particular. She did not watch people, she did not count cars. She simply stood there, breathing slowly, letting the morning pass through her. Some mornings feel like they remember you, even when you do not want to remember anything. On the small table beside her lay a notebook. It was old, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, familiar way. The cover had faded slightly, the corners were worn. It had been opened and closed many times, usually at night, when the world outside grew silent. She reached for it and opened it carefully, as if the pages inside might break if she moved too fast. The writing was simple, short lines, no long stories, no explanations, just thoughts that did not know where else to go. She turned a few pages, then stopped. One line stood alone in the middle of the page. I am still waiting, but I do not know for what. She read it once, then again. Her lips curved to a small smile, barely there. Not a smile of happiness and not a smile of pain. It was the kind of smile that appears when you recognize something about yourself and do not fight it anymore. Waiting had become part of her life, not waiting for a moment or a message or a clear answer, just waiting in a general way, like standing in a room where something once happened and feeling that it might happen again, even when you know it probably won't. She closed the notebook and placed it back on the table. Years ago, someone else used to stand near this window with her. He liked mornings less than she did. He moved too quickly, spoke too easily, laughed too loudly for a room this quiet. He always acted like time was something he could borrow and return later. His name was Daniel. She did not say his name often now. She did not need to. It lived somewhere inside her, like a sound she could hear only when everything else became silent. I still remember your voice. Back then, love felt simple, not perfect, not dramatic, just simple. They shared breakfasts without speaking much. They shared long walks where nothing important was said. They shared plans that were never fully clear but felt safe simply because they were shared. Daniel talked about the future as if it was a place he could visit and return from freely. He made promises without realizing they carried weight. He believed intention was enough. One evening, standing in this same room, he said it. I need to go for a while, he told her. Just a short time. I will come back. He said it gently, not carelessly, but also not carefully. She believed him, not because she needed him to stay, not because she was afraid to be alone. She believed him because trust felt natural with him, like breathing, like opening the window in the morning without checking the weather. The sound of movement downstairs pulled her back into the present. The cafe below her apartment was opening. She heard chairs being moved, a door unlocking, the low hum of a machine warming up. It was time to begin the day. She put on her sweater, wrapped a scarf loosely around her neck, and walked down the narrow stairs. The cafe smelled of coffee and bread, just like it always had. The smell settled into her immediately, familiar and grounding. She turned on the lights, tied her apron, and wiped the counter slowly, even though it was already clean. Customers arrived one by one. Some came every day, some only when the weather was cold. They spoke about ordinary things, work, weather, small complaints that disappeared as soon as they were spoken. She listened, she answered, she smiled when it felt natural. Time moved differently here. On the wall behind the counter hung a small clock. It ticked quietly, marking time without emotion. There was a period in her life when she watched that clock too closely, when she counted minutes, when she waited for the door to open with a specific sound. She did not do that anymore. Now she noticed the clock only when it stopped. Late in the afternoon, the cafe grew quiet. Only one person sat near the window, reading slowly, turning pages with care. Outside, clouds gathered, and the light softened. She stood behind the counter, holding a cup she did not need to clean, and felt something familiar pass through her. Not sadness exactly, more like a memory brushing against her, then moving on. Under the counter, there was a small space she rarely looked at. There was nothing important there, just things she did not know where else to place. She did not reach for anything, she only noticed the space and turned her attention away again. Daniel left one morning without noise, no long conversation, no final discussion, just a quiet goodbye and a short note left on the table. "I will come back. Wait for me." She waited. At first, she counted days. She marked them without meaning to, noticing how many mornings passed without change. Then she counted weeks, then months. Letters came at the beginning, short messages, written quickly. "I am busy, but I think of you. I will return soon." Soon became later. Later became silence. The silence was not loud. It did not hurt sharply. It simply stayed, filling the space where words used to be. People spoke to her during that time, friends, customers, strangers who noticed her quietness and tried to name it. They told her to move on, to stop waiting, to be strong. She listened politely, she nodded, she thanked them. But anger never stayed with her. It came briefly, then left. She was not angry. She was tired. One evening, an older woman sat at the counter longer than usual. She watched her for a moment, then spoke softly. "You do not have to wait forever," the woman said. She met the woman's eyes and nodded. "I know." But knowing something and feeling it are not the same. That night, after closing the cafe, she returned upstairs and opened her notebook again. She wrote slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I am still here. You are not, and the world keeps going." She did not cry. Tears felt unnecessary, like they would ask more of her than she wanted to give. Instead, sadness stayed quietly with her, light enough to carry, heavy enough to notice. Life continued to offer small moments of kindness, a child laughing too loudly, a stranger saying thank you and meaning it, the sound of rain against warm stone. These moments did not remove the past, they only made room around it. Slowly, without ceremony, something changed. She stopped listening for his footsteps. She stopped expecting the door to open in a particular way. One morning, while pouring hot water into a cup, she noticed her hands were steady. Her chest felt calm.
She was no longer waiting. The realization surprised her. When did this happen? She did not know the answer, and for the first time she understood that the answer did not matter. Outside, the rain ended. Light returned to the street, quiet and unremarkable. She stood there between what had been and what was now, not yet knowing that forgiveness was already moving toward her, slowly, patiently, without asking to be seen.
The days after that realization did not change in a visible way. The cafe opened at the same hour, the same customers arrived, the same clock ticked on the wall, and yet something inside her had shifted, quietly, like furniture moved in the dark. Nothing looked different, but the space felt new. She noticed how her mornings felt lighter, not happy, just lighter, the kind of lightness that comes when you stop holding something you did not realize was heavy. I remember watching her one afternoon as she stood near the counter, listening to the low sound of rain outside. Her face was calm, not empty, not full, just present. It is strange how peace can feel unfamiliar at first. She still thought about Daniel sometimes. Memories do not disappear just because you stop waiting. They return in small ways. A phrase someone uses, a laugh that sounds almost the same, a song playing quietly from a passing car. But now, when those memories appeared, they did not pull her backward. They came, paused for a moment, and then passed on. One evening, after the cafe closed, she stayed downstairs longer than usual. The chairs were turned upside down on the tables, the lights were low. Outside, the street was empty, washed clean by earlier rain. She wiped the counter slowly, even though it was already clean. When she finished, she leaned against it and let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Under the counter, there was still that small space, the one she rarely looked at. This time, she reached for it. She took out a small box and placed it on the counter. The box was plain, without decoration. It held things she did not want to throw away, but did not want to see every day either. Inside were a key, an old photograph, and a folded note. She did not open the note. She did not need to. She already knew what it said. "I will come back." She looked at the photograph instead. Two people near the sea, hair moving in the wind, smiling at something outside the frame. A moment frozen in a time when everything felt open and unfinished. We really believed we had time. She closed the box again. She did not feel anger. She did not feel sadness. What she felt was distance. Not cold distance, but gentle distance, like looking at a place you once lived in from far away. She placed the box back under the counter. That night, upstairs in her room, she opened the window and let the cool air in. The city felt quieter than usual, or maybe she was simply listening differently now. She took out her notebook and turned to a blank page. The pen rested in her hand for a long moment before she wrote anything. Forgiveness did not arrive as a decision. It arrived as understanding. She wrote slowly. "I waited because I believed. I stayed because I hoped. I let go because I am tired of carrying what no longer lives." She stopped and read the sentence again. It felt true. Not perfect, but true. She did not forgive Daniel because he asked. He never did. She did not forgive him because he returned. He never did that either. She forgave him because holding the past had become heavier than letting it go. Forgiveness, she realized, was not something you give to another person. It is something you give to yourself. "I let you go." The next day, a letter arrived. It was mixed in with advertisements and bills. The envelope was simple. Her name was written carefully, as if the writer did not want to rush her. She stood by the counter for a moment before opening it.
Inside, the message was short. I met Daniel last year. He spoke of you. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped you were well. That was all. No address, no explanation, no request. Just words placed gently into her life, too late to change anything. She read the letter once, then she folded it and placed it on the counter. Her hands did not shake, her heart did not race. Instead, a quiet stillness filled her chest. So this is how it ends. For years, she imagined this moment differently. She imagined questions and answers. She imagined apologies spoken aloud. She imagined tears, hers or his or both. But none of that came, and she understood why. Some stories do not need an ending spoken out loud. They end the moment you stop waiting for them to continue. That evening, she walked home slowly. The sky was clear and the air felt cool against her face. She did not replay the letter in her mind. She did not argue with it. She let it be what it was. At home, she placed the letter inside the small box under the counter, next to the photograph and the key. She closed the box and slid it back into its place. Not hidden, not forgotten, just no longer needed. Days passed. Spring arrived without asking for attention. Flowers appeared near the windows of nearby buildings. The light stayed longer in the evenings. She opened the cafe windows more often now. She let sounds come in. Voices, footsteps, music drifting from somewhere far away. Her days felt fuller, not because something new had arrived, but because something old had finally left. She still spoke softly, she still moved slowly, but there was a steadiness in her now that had not been there before. One morning, as she locked the cafe door, she paused and looked down the street. The road stretched forward, empty and open. She felt no need to look back. I remember that moment clearly, the way she stood there, breathing easily, as if she had finally put something down after carrying it for too long. Forgiveness did not change the past. It did not rewrite the story. It simply allowed her to live without holding it every day. She stepped forward. The street welcomed her quietly, without promises, without noise, and for the first time in a long while, she walked on without waiting for anyone to follow.